Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. My name is Kate Gaudette. I work for the Honors Program and the Humanities Department here at UNH. Welcome to the fifth event in our Sidore Lecture Series, What is a Criminal? The Saul O. Sidore Memorial Lecture Series was established back in 1965 in memory of Saul O. Sidore of Manchester, New Hampshire. The purpose of the series is to offer the university community and the state of New Hampshire programs that raise critical and sometimes controversial issues facing our society. The University of New Hampshire Center for the Humanities sponsors the programs, represented tonight by Stephen Trascoma. Thank you for being here and for your support. Through this series, we're exploring mass incarceration in the U.S. and New Hampshire, and we've tried to assemble panels that bring together national and local perspectives. Today, we're very excited to welcome a group of panelists to discuss scholar inmates learning while incarcerated. Those of you who were here for our last event learned about the Bard Prison Initiative, and today we'll be discussing how that model compares with another program called Inside Out, learning more about the experience and outcomes of people learning through prison teaching programs. Before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to mention our next event on March 3rd, which will focus on diversion programs in New Hampshire. In other words, efforts to keep people out of prison. We'll have Chief John Drury of the Farmington Police, Chief Justice Tina Nadeau of the New Hampshire Supreme Court, and Carrie Conway, who leads programming for the criminal justice system here in Stratford County. So I hope you'll be able to join us again in a few weeks for that event. So to our panel, we're very happy to welcome our neighbor from Vermont, Kathryn J. Fox. I'm sorry, I screwed it up. Okay, we'll try this again. Kathryn J. Fox, professor of sociology and director of the Liberal Arts in Prison program at the University of Vermont. Professor Fox studies social control and punishment, and her recent work has focused on outcomes and offender reentry programs. In 2008, she launched the UVM Liberal Arts in Prison program, offering credit-bearing courses in 2 Vermont prisons. UVM was the first public institution to join the Bard College Consortium for the Liberal Arts in Prison. Jeri Kirby, assistant professor of criminal justice at Fairmont State University, earned her Ph.D. in political science from West Virginia University, and is currently assistant professor of criminal justice and chair of the social science department at Fairmont State University in West Virginia. Dr. Kirby has a 20-year history of life and studies in incarceration, beginning with her own incarceration in the federal system from 1992 to 94. After Dr. Kirby's release, she quickly began her education with the focus of understanding and changing correctional policy. After being introduced to Inside Out programs in 2008, she became certified and started her career as an educator behind the walls of prisons. She currently serves as the West Virginia State and Federal Coordinator for the Inside Out Prison Exchange Program and is a member of Convict Criminology, a group of criminology scholars made up of currently and formerly incarcerated people. Finally, Courtney Marshall teaches English at Phillips Exeter Academy and is a former assistant professor of English here at UNH, and we're very happy to have her back with us on campus. Committed to opening dialogues about race, gender, and social justice issues, Dr. Marshall is an advocate for prison reform and is writing her first book titled Apprehending Black Womanhood, Citizenship and the Carceral State. Since 2011, she has led literacy groups at the Northern New Hampshire Correctional Facility in Berlin, and in hopes of improving prison life by bringing literature to inmates. I'm from New Hampshire, I should know that. So thanks so much for being here. We're going to have each panelist speak briefly about their own experiences, and then we will quickly go to Q&A to hear from all of you. Thank you.
All right, let's see if I can. Perfect, okay. I hope you can read that. So thank you for inviting me here. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff and happy to answer any questions afterwards. I only have a few slides. I just wanted to give you a little tiny bit of history. So I'm a professor of sociology and a criminologist. I teach corrections, criminal justice, and I realized from studying reentry and spending a lot of time in prisons, particularly the women's prison that's local, that I saw a lot of people with not very many opportunities, but with a lot of talent and potential. So I had a very easy time. I went to my dean and said, I think we should start offering classes inside the prison, and he said, great. So I have an unusual story in the fact that I had a relatively easy time. I can talk about some of the challenges, certainly, but I had buy-in by administrators all the way up. UVM has a social justice mission, and particularly in the College of Arts and Sciences, and so my dean saw it as part of the mission. So in 2017, we joined the Bard Consortium for the Liberal Arts in Prison, and that's just a group of college and prison programs that follow the Bard model loosely, which is only to say that you maintain rigor. You don't change it or make it easier or make it remedial. You're offering real college courses, by real college instructors and that sort of thing. And we were the first public university to join. There are others since then, I believe. But we didn't start offering courses until 2018, and we have offered courses in 2 prisons. One is the local women's prison, which only houses 140 people, so we can talk about that. And then there's a prison about 40 minutes away that's a men's facility, and we have offered courses there as well. That one is more challenging for reasons I can explain if you're interested. But and I also do myself sort of a hybrid between the Inside Out program and the Bard program, which I can talk about, but I don't want to talk about it because you're going to talk about it. So, so far we have served 49 students with credit-bearing courses. We've taught mythology, English 1, sociology, statistics, and right now I'm teaching something called justice and ethics, and we're really dissecting different philosophical arguments about what a just society is, and this is the one where we're mixing, inside and outside students. So I just wanted to give you a few comments from students. We do an assessment at the end. We're trying to measure the impact, and it's very difficult for a lot of reasons, because what we're offering is introductory level courses to people, and then we're working on ramping up sort of reentry help to connect people to college on the outside, but so far we haven't really done that, except that a few people have gotten out and have gone to college. But when we do the assessment, we're trying to assess whether people feel more confident about their writing or other kinds of skills. So it's partly about skills, but for me, it's more about, because I study reentry, and my research and other research shows that it is really a function of whether people have optimism for the future. That's really determines whether or not they can desist from crime. And one of the things I think that this does more than content knowledge or skill building is confidence, the ability to see themselves differently, to create a narrative that they're something other than a criminal. And so they refer to themselves as students all the time, and we refer to them as students. And one of the things when I first was in there, I said, look, I'm holding you to the same standard that I hold anybody else. I'm not going to cut you any slack just because you're in prison. And they said, that is so refreshing, because people always expect so little of us, and they really liked the fact that we were holding them to a higher standard. So you can just read those yourself, but especially the second quote where it says, in here, we are students, we are not criminals. I think part of the benefit of it is actually just offering a space where they can together see themselves and have a little bit of respite from the drudgery of prison, and have something where they occupy their mind and think about things, that are maybe timeless or certainly beyond the walls. And I will just briefly talk about the challenges just to kind of put them on your radar, and then we can talk about them in the Q&A. A lot of the schools, if you look at the Bard Consortium, for example, a lot of the schools are private schools. And Bard, for example, they just decided to waive tuition for incarcerated students, which is enviable. And so their expenses relatively are low. I don't because they pay the instructor. Sometimes instructors volunteer, and they pay for books and supplies. We can't have instructors volunteer because we have a represented faculty, and then we have to scholarship the tuition. We can't use general funds, so I fundraise for it, and it's expensive. So every class is more than $2,000 per student. So the other challenges, which are kind of good problems in a certain way, is we have a very small prison population in Vermont, and we only have 1,100 people incarcerated in the whole state. And at the women's prison, which is 140, there, the number of people that are either college ready, college interested, or haven't taken that particular class or something, and will have a long enough sentence to be able to complete a course or a curriculum, is really, really small, because most people are doing very short sentences, especially women, right? They're in and out multiple times for violations and things like that, so it's not really a stable cohort population. That I would say is probably the biggest challenge. The other is distance. So, it's a rural state, very similar. I mean, we're just the flip of you guys, right? So, our prisons are spread out, and even though the state is tiny, it's 2 hours to the next closest prison. So being able to do that logistically with faculty is challenging. And then the other is technology. So one of the ways we could scale it and reach people, out in those rural prisons would be through distance learning or some sort of teleconferencing. I don't really know. I mean, certainly online courses are not the same as doing in-person classes, but if there were some sort of teleconferencing or, seems like technology could maybe help in some ways, but that's not been possible so far. And, I'm sure from the Bard folks telling you that people inside don't have internet access, so that's just a huge barrier. And so those are the main challenges, and that said, it's worth it. It's my passion, and I can't see myself not doing it anymore. But I'm going to stop here to keep it brief so we can have lots of time to discuss, and I will turn it over to Jeri.
I didn't know about a PowerPoint thing, so sorry, nothing to look at except my mug. Okay, so my name is Jeri. I first want to start out with thanking everyone for being here and thanking Sidore, the program, for bringing me here. It's always great to join these conversations, and it's much needed, much needed. So to give you a little history about myself, I have all that doctor degree and everything, but I also have an inmate number, 1478618. I know it better than my social security number. You never forget it once you get it. I had a 6.5-year split sentence in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. I did 27 months while incarcerated, the rest on pretty intensive probation, if you've ever been on probation. So yes, it was a drug charge. I was a product of, the war on drugs in '92. That was prime Bill Clinton time, for those students who are making sure you know the history here. I think what I more than anything want to bring to you is there's something about being incarcerated that a lot of people don't really know unless you're there. For one thing, when you come out, you kind of come out the underclass of the underclass, right? We are clearly a class system. Well, here's a group that's already labeled and not wanted in general society. So I was telling Alex and Kate at lunch today that I think a very unique thing about being incarcerated is there's a camaraderie that develops, a community that develops inside of that prison. We're all in khakis. We're all here because we're some type of felon in some form. So you can't really judge me, right? We're both standing here. And so there's a class system inside, but yeah, there's a camaraderie that forms that when you come out, it just falls apart, right? And believe it or not, after my incarceration, people think I'm nuts when I say this. Let me just say that institutionalization happens very quickly while incarcerated. But I remember sitting on the edge of my bed at my mother's house, literally thinking, I want to go home, because prison had become that to me instead of the real world, unfortunately. And it took me years to figure out what that was. Not that my family wasn't happy to have me back. Oh my gosh, they were ecstatic, of course. And I was fortunate, and let me say this, very fortunate, very privileged to have a family to go home to. My mom worked very hard on that little bedroom, let me just say that. So, but I still felt that way. And, you know, I can honestly say the only reason I probably stayed free was because of my family, particularly my mother. She came and visited me every holiday, every birthday, drove 5 hours one way and 5 hours back. So I at least owed her my freedom, you know, which was her freedom too. So yeah, there's a whole lot of story between all of that, but to get to the main point of it, I think it's important that everybody knows that if you don't give individuals a community after they're coming out of prison, they will find one. They will find one. Unfortunately, it's not always in a positive way. That's why our recidivism rates in most states around this country is just outrageous. Yeah, because the punishments never stop. You think incarceration, now you're free, you get a second chance. That is not the case. That is not the case. I can honestly tell you, and I stand in front of Federal Bureau correctional officers and administrators, and I tell them prison wasn't the hard part. That's what you have to understand. Reentering is the hard part. And, you know, all these collateral punishments, yes, they are getting better. I have to give the country cahoots for that. But it's because we realized we really screwed up. You know, the war on drugs was never meant to be what it was. It was supposed to be a deterrent. It was never meant to be something that put 2.4 million people in prisons. So to fast forward, I think it's really important to say that I am not an individual who thinks I didn't deserve my time. I've never complained about my incarceration. I mean, you know, what I did would have gotten me time even without the war on drugs. But it was what I seen while I was inside. Particularly, in case somebody asked me, what was it that kind of turned me inside? Well, there's a couple things, but one particular individual, this 18-year-old girl named Trish, I was 30 days from release. So I had already kind of turned my corner about a year into my sentence. But she came in, she was 18 years old. And, you know, everybody in here can remember when they're 18, some much closer than others. And she had a 15-year sentence on a conspiracy drug charge from a boyfriend. And it just crushed me because I only had a drop of that and I know what it did to me. So I'll never forget her. I don't know even what her last name is. I don't know where she is. But that's the sentence that pissed me off, frankly. So I came out and I started to school. I came out in October, started to school in January. But it was very difficult because I couldn't get school loans, obviously. So it took me many years of part-time until I eventually got to a point where I could start going to full-time. And I think just because you're free doesn't mean you lift your head up much, right? You're kind of still scared that somebody's going to take it off or throw it back inside. So I kind of lived my life like that for many, many years, for probably about 10 years. And then I made an unusual friendship with Dr. Jim Nolan. He's a WVU professor. He was actually an FBI agent at the time and was adjuncting at WVU. Funny, right? And to this day, we're still the closest friends that we could be. But I can't even remember how he found out about my conviction. And he actually started asking me to go around and talk about it, right? Because he said, no, people want to hear your story. And I'm like, no, they don't. I don't want to tell it. They don't want to know it. So he really became my mentor. And from there, he said, you got to go to grad school. I actually wanted to go to law school. And this kind of begins, many doors closed, but this is where they really became prevalent. So I worked really hard, got the grades, went to law school and applied, and they said, yes, we can let you in, but we don't know if we can ever let you practice. Because at the time, convicted felons were not allowed to practice law. So they said, sure, you can give us 3 years of your tuition, but I don't know if you're going to ever use it. I was like, I don't think so. So I jumped in a master's program, got my master's in sociology. And from there, I actually tried to do some other things, other doors closed. And then Dr. Nolan looked at me and he said, you're just going to have to go to school until they can no longer tell you what you can and can't do. And that's exactly what I did. So from there, at 2008, Jim, Dr. Nolan, he said, you got to go to this inside out class I'm doing. He went and got trained, and I said, have you fell out of your tree? You want me to go back in a prison? Why would I ever do that voluntarily without cuffs on, right? But I did, and that's really how it started. So I literally TA'd for him. I didn't even take the class. I TA'd for him, and then I went to the training. And let me tell you, that was I found my community. Finally, I found my community. And it was a community of acceptance. It was a community of education. It was a community of support, saying you are more than your worst mistake. You are not a convicted felon. You are a person that was incarcerated. Start the label with a person instead of labeling people their worst mistakes. From there, I have taught over 20, I think I'm on my 25th Inside Out class right now. I started and the director and founder, Lori Pompa, she says, you trying to catch up with me? But let me just tell you very briefly a quick thing about it, a few things about Inside Out. I can't say anything about Inside Out without talking about Lori Pompa, the director and founder of Inside Out. She, to be honest with you, she got the idea from Paul. He was a guy that was incarcerated in Graterford, and from there, it just developed, and it was a vision that she just never let go of. It's out of Temple University. We are currently in 47 states and 7 other countries, I believe, maybe 9 countries, I might have that wrong. And thousands of inside and outside students have taken this program. So what is it? The most simplest way I can describe it, because it's very hard to describe, it's bringing 2 communities together that would never have a conversation. These communities most often are college students and individuals incarcerated. So what we do is we take 15 to 17 college students, and we take 15 individuals incarcerated, and we have class inside the prison every week. So no classrooms, prison. All the students are like, oh, hell no. Trust me. I can honestly tell you there's nothing more life-changing. And I say that to my students, and they're like, oh, yeah, whatever. And in the end, they're like, you're so right. Because here's a talk. Think about this. Think about who you would never likely have a conversation with. And you're sitting having that class with that individual every week. Everybody reads the same things. We discuss the same things. They write the same papers. And it people who've lived it, people who have learned it. You bring them together and amazing things happen. So I think, and I'm happy to talk about Inside Out more, but I think what I want to say to finish up is that, you know, on average, our recidivism rate in this country is around 60%. But let me tell you, one college class drops that to 19%. One college class. So obviously, education inside is invaluable. But the graduate programs, the colleges that are putting that check the box on their applications. There's actually an article in the higher ed regarding this. Harvard professors kind of boycotted because they refused to let a convicted felon into a graduate program. Yale currently will not allow a convicted felon into a graduate program. Universities in the Carolinas, it's endless. Currently, right now, there's less than 34 colleges in this country that can issue degrees inside of prisons. 34. That's not much. And the question is even if they're accredited. So I think the one thing I want to end with is, if you keep anything that I've said, just remember what I said about offering people a community, because we want to give it to them in freedom. I don't want to see any more people find it in prisons. Thank you.
Hello. Y'all look so serious. Very nice. It's very, I was saying it's really interesting to be back here. So as was said in the intro, I used to teach here, and now I'm over at Phillips Exeter. And when I came back, I was like, oh, everyone's going to look so much like grown up, like compared to the high schoolers, and you do. So it's funny. So when I was here, I said, you all look like babies. Now you all look like grown-ups. That's amazing. But you'll still be babies in my heart. All right. So again, my name is Courtney Marshall, and I work through the New Hampshire Humanities Council in the Connections program. And so I'll talk a little bit about what it's like leading a reading group that doesn't give credit, but is really a voluntary group for folks to sign up for. So I got into the work maybe a couple years after I moved to New Hampshire. When I was in graduate school, I went to UCLA for my Ph.D. And when I was there, I got interested in prison literature. And so before, as an undergrad, I had been studying Black women's literature and Black feminist theory, and kind of stumbled upon thinking about law and literature, and decided to go to California to get my degree. And then I got introduced to like the world of like prison studies in California. And it was really exciting to see all the work that folks were doing around the role of literature in prisons, the ways that incarcerated people have been thought to be able to rehabilitate themselves through literature, as well as lots of work around the representation of incarcerated folks in films and in pieces of literature. So when I came out here, it was kind of accidental that I got caught up in the Humanities Council. They had this program, this Connections program, and it is a literacy program that works with what we call pre-readers. So folks who are learning how to read, folks learning English, and in my case, the incarcerated folks. So this program runs through the family connection centers in the prison. So when I got here, and somebody told me, oh, we have this program. And I was like, oh, that's cool. That's real cute. And she said, oh, we have someone in Concord. So we have a facilitator there, and we have someone in Goffstown. And they said, well, we didn't have anybody in Berlin. And I was like, oh, where's that? And then she said, oh, it's like, 2-3 hours away, right? And I got here from Los Angeles. So driving 3 hours is like nothing. I was like, well, I can drive 3 hours. And so it was me and my Prius, and I went up to the, I was like, okay, poo, poo, poo. And I went there, and I've been going back ever since. And so I started in, like I said, in Berlin, and Berlin is the place where I've gone the most. And then they said, oh, would you like to go to Concord to hang out with the men there? And I was like, okay. And they said, oh, you seem to be good. You want to go to Goffstown? There's some women. I was like, sure. And then they sent me to Shea Farm in Concord, which is transitional housing. And so I was able to do that as well. And so how the program runs is they run in 4-week sessions. Each session has a theme and has a book selection process. So I work with the head of the Family Connection Center at the prison wherever I am. And so we have different themes. So we've had themes like, parenthood and working and, justice, so all types of things. And if you're interested, you can actually go on the New Hampshire Humanities Council's website, and you can look at the Connections program, and you can see the themes, and you can see all of the books. So the one thing that was different about the prison-based program is that, one, I wasn't necessarily working with folks who were learning English, right, or working on their reading skills. So we had a much wider range of works that we could use. So the one time I did work with a group of folks learning English, so what we do, so for example, we would use picture books, right? So you'd have a picture book, and we'd say, so what do we think this story is about based on the picture, right? So that might be an activity that we would do. Or we had, I was with a group of kind of new Americans, and so we read this book, Everybody Loves Rice. It was either Everybody Loves Rice or Everybody Eats Rice. But it was a story about somebody who had to go find her little brother in the neighborhood, so she goes to everybody's house, and they're all making rice in different ways. And so that was a way, again, to not necessarily be about these are the themes of the book, but really how can you bring a story to life with different groups of people. And that's really what the Connections program is about. So when you put them in the prisons and you put them in the Family Connection Center, what they turn into are ways for parents and kids to connect through literature. Right, so that's really the focus. So, for example, we had a theme of working, and so we read Studs Terkel's Working, and so all these things about people's jobs. And so one of the questions I asked was so what does your kid want to be when they grow up? Right? What did you want to be? What do you want to do? And so we would have discussions like that. When I was in the men's prison in Concord, we read a graphic novel version of the Odyssey. And so we talked about what is it like to be a father, to be a son, to be away from your family for a long period of time. And it was really cool to see them connect with the story. I was actually telling Dr. Lanier about when I went to the Goffstown prison with the women, and we read a graphic novel version of Romeo and Juliet, and the women didn't like Romeo at all because they said that he ruined Juliet's life. And so our whole conversation was about the horrible boyfriends that they had growing up, and so that was really cool. I like that. But we've read things like The Giver, Boys in the Boat, so we do big works, but then we've also done really vibrant picture books. We did books about sit-ins. We did, there was one point we read a book about a principal and how he was kind of making friends among the students and trying to get the students to trust him. So that was kind of cool. And so that's what I do. So what's really interesting about the work is, one, when I came to it, as I said, I was doing all this research about how do they read and what do they do, and what does this all mean for literature? And then I found that I really liked reading with them. Then I liked kind of describing what they were doing, and so that was a real shift for me. And it was one of the interesting shifts that actually led me away from higher ed. I found that I really wanted to read more with people in the community. I didn't want to read by myself or read, no offense to y'all, I didn't want to read with y'all, just y'all. I wanted to read with y'all, but I wanted to read with other people too. And I wanted to see what they thought about books like The Giver, right? And so it was really nice because some of them would come in and I'll talk mostly about the men that I work with. Some of them had very close connections to their children. One of the other facets of the program is that the men get to keep the books, so they can record themselves reading the books, and they can send the books home with the recording. They can send them to their children. There were some men who had no connection with their children, but they still came to the program, in the hopes that someday they might have some type of connection. There were also men who were grandfathers, who were just trying to connect. And there were just men who liked reading. And they said, this is really the only space. We watch TV a lot of the rest of the time. Like, this is the only space where we can really sit and talk about books. So they really want more. Like, they wanted more opportunities to have discussions, and to, like they said, we want to feel smart, right? And so they really enjoyed that. So the challenges. One, I remember my Department of Corrections volunteer training, and I remember how they came in. We all sat there, and they were like, don't tell them anything about yourself, right? And they really made it seem like, you were going to walk in, and everybody was going to be like predators on you, and like everything you said, and they somehow like turn it around, and somehow you just be caught up and like on Dateline or something at some point. But it was so different from that. And I've had, lots of family members who've been incarcerated, including my mother. So I guess they felt like the people who were volunteering had no experience with folks. And I was like, well, that's my mama, I'm going to be, whatever. So that was cool. So that was a challenge. It sometimes was a challenge in that the folks, the readers, they couldn't express all the emotions that they were feeling, not necessarily because of the other people in the room, but because of the guards. Like, they were really concerned about, well, if we get too excited, right? Or if there's something that's, unfair in this book, and then we want to connect it to the fact that, we've had bologna sandwiches every day, and we don't like that. Like, that would be a problem for them. And so that was a challenge. I did enjoy kind of having really positive experiences with them. Some of them came in and had bad experiences with English teachers, bad experiences with school in general. And so when I came in and they were like, they would come, they was like, well, here's Dr. Marshall, and she's from UNH. And they kind of, I don't know. But then I would walk in, I'd be like, hey, let's read. And over time, they were like, oh, she's cool. She's not that bad. So I really enjoyed, that. Let's see. Let me see, I had another. So now it's funny, I just decided this year to return to my book project. So I was working on it, and I kind of let it go for a little bit because I wasn't sure how I would bring all this together. So we'll figure out that in a minute. And then finally, I just want to end by saying another thing that was, really interesting is that I never knew kind of what they were in for. That was never a part of any intake or anything. Like, I would just get there and they would say, these are the people who are signed up. And I made sure I said that the first day. And I would say that it was really important to me that they had a positive experience, that they could say, I said, I ain't write none of these books. And I would say just like that, look, I ain't write none of these books. If you don't like it, that's fine. We can figure something out. And there were books that they were like, The Giver, they weren't too happy about, but then they were like, but it's a movie. And then they were happy, right? So then people talked about how it was a movie. And so then we were cool with it. which was good. But again, like not knowing, what they were in for, but again, like really going in there with a lot of respect. I had a lot of respect for everyone who came in. And again, there were people who hadn't finished high school, people who had gone to college. There was one man who said he finally got to read all the books he never got to read because he was always working really hard. And I'll just end with one. There was one moment where there was one man who was very upset about, some inefficiency, some office that misplaced paperwork. And that happened, a good amount. It's challenging, trying to write when you have to count the pencils and find the pencils. So there are a lot of things that you can't necessarily do more freely in other types of classrooms. So you do have to kind of think on your feet a lot. But there was a man who was very upset, and he was going to go into the office and like tell whoever it was, where to go and how to get there, as my grandma would say. And so finally, but the other men in the room were like, no, like, dude, don't do that, because then you'll just get in more trouble. And we were reading this book of poems. And so finally, they just started reading poems to him. And it was really cool. So they just kind of read more and more poems. And eventually, he started reading the poems. He was like, okay, like I'll be cool. So, and then eventually, he got what it is he needed from the office that he needed. And so again, this is the last thing. The thing that was most interesting is what they thought of me when I was there. So again, you go to the training and they say, be scared and all that. Let me tell you something. I said, I ain't scared of nothing. I ain't say it like that. But they were really interested in what it was like for me being a teacher. They always wanted to talk about women. Like they always wanted to connect. How is this helping us think about gender? So I was in women's studies. So they wanted women's studies classes. So they really, every group I went to, they were just really interested in all these other kind of themes and facets of the book. So it really went beyond, okay, we're on a plot level, but they really wanted to talk about really deep things. And that was the most surprising to me, based, again, on what I had learned from the Department of Corrections training. And so that was really, really exciting to me. So I still manage. I can't go as often as I did when I was a professor because life at a boarding school means you're there a good amount of time. But I still do get up to Berlin every year, and we're getting ready to kick off another session. So I'm really excited to see what happens. And again, some of the men, they come once, but there are men who come time after time, just because they really enjoy the experience. So that's what I like. I like being able to go and give them just a nice experience for a couple of hours. So thank you.
Thank you all for sharing that with us. I thought it was really interesting to think about the education that you're providing for individuals who are in prison, how it would foster a different community, one that they can take outside. And I'm sure it also fosters a different community with those who are in the classes with them, as we saw last Sidore when we looked at the College Behind Bars documentary. You got that sense that there was a sense of community between or among all of the individuals who are in the college classes, and also a connectivity with those who are outside as well, as Courtney just described. So that was pretty interesting. I can open it up if anybody has any questions. Okay. We'll use a microphone because we're taping all of this.
And we'd like to encourage students first.
Thank you, sir, and thank you guys very much for speaking. I think it's absolutely phenomenal that you guys are speaking about this and how, we should have more of these in education programs or so, because I do think that, looking at the statistics, reduces recidivism rate, and also, what I think is really the right thing to do to give people a second chance and stuff. And at the end of the day, actually, long story short, a few months from now, I'm probably going to be going to to Norway to meet the maximum security governor and to get a tour to prison and stuff, and because I connected with him on LinkedIn, and I was wondering sort of what we could do on top of, say, even on top of like an education program, so what we can do overall to adopt sort of like a Norwegian-style criminal justice system. How can we make it as humane as possible so we could, do things that reduce recidivism rates, like the education prison programs?
Go ahead.
I'm excited that you asked that question because Vermont was one of the 5 states that got an Urban Institute grant, and I'm the research partner with my colleague Abby Crocker. And what it's a prison research network for people who want to innovate prisons. And what our former Commissioner of Corrections wanted to do is do a pilot based on a Norwegian model. And for those of you that don't know much about the Norwegian model, just Google it and you'll see a lot of stuff. They're getting a huge amount of attention in the U.S. and their principles are that they would try to keep life inside as normal as possible. And the security is called dynamic security, which means that officers interact. It's based on relationships rather than locks and keys and things like that. So I think in the United States there is a lot of interest in trying to change the way we do prisons. There are places that have done it or done something similar or an Americanized version of it, North Dakota and a couple other places. And I don't know what the other states are with the urban grant that are trying to do that, but in Vermont, we're doing a pilot with the purpose of trying to scale it. And one of the things that I think is important to note is that it's also better for the officers. The work conditions are better. They have lower rates of illness and substance use and things like that. So, education would be easier to provide in an environment like that, for sure, because it is challenging when you have to count the pencils and you have to, I'll be sitting there teaching a class and an officer will come in for head count to make sure that everyone is there where they're supposed to be. And the mood in the room changes dramatically during that period, and then it goes back to normal. But there's, and in Vermont, the officers are very supportive and I don't have any problems, but I have heard some horror stories about other people trying to teach in other facilities. And, so there's just, I think that the harshness that we have in the US is going to dissipate somewhat. I have no idea how much, but I think that their success rate in Norway and Germany and places like that, they're hard to argue with, right? They have a 20% recidivism rate compared to ours. So, and we spend a lot of money to do what we do. So, anyway.
Any other questions? Sure.
So you said they're implementing that with that pilot program in Vermont. So I'd imagine, imagine that it's working pretty well so far, right? I can't speak on behalf of you since I don't know, but is the system working pretty well, the pilot program in Vermont? Already seen like lower recidivism rates and stuff?
We're just starting it.
Oh, just starting out, okay, yeah.
No, we don't know yet.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, who was?
Hi, this is actually directed at a remark you made, Kathryn, but I think everybody can probably speak to it. You alluded at one point in your talk about differences between doing these programs with men and doing them with women, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about what those differences are.
Well, in my case, it really has to do with structural features of the facilities, really not so much gender in this particular case. The men's prison, there isn't a place to teach except in this external building, which is a great building. It's the education building, but it isn't staffed at night. So we can only teach during the day, and then with their rigid schedules, and faculty trying to get up there and teach and then go back. It's been difficult because of that. I would say that otherwise, In my experience, both groups work really hard. They do the work under really difficult circumstances. They've done the reading, they have pages of notes. Because they don't have access to computers, they write drafts by hand, tear it up, write another draft by hand, do, things that I don't know that all my students at UVM would do, So I haven't noticed any difference in that regard, except that the content of conversations, I mean, the women talk a lot more about their children, they talk more about their families, in my, limited experience, but I couldn't speak really to, I don't know, maybe you can, about the differences with men and women. I haven't seen it.
Me speak about women in prison? Okay. Okay, so I teach in the federal system mostly, and I'm actually teach in the Hazleton Federal Penitentiary. A lot of people know that because of the Whitey Bulger thing, yeah, unfortunately. So in that system, it's very vast. In the penitentiary, higher security, I'm in the men's facility, I'm constantly negotiating with gangs. Literally, I have to almost get permission from them to run the programs. It's logistically, it's crazy. It's almost more negotiating with them than it is with administration. So that's very different in women's facilities. Notoriously, it's not that there's not gangs there, but that's not something that you have to navigate as much. And teaching in a women's facility, being in a women's facility, I mean, you have to keep in mind that, approximately 80% of all women incarcerated have been victims of violent sexual offenses as victims themselves. So, being trauma informed. To me, there is a difference, most definitely, in teaching the two different genders. I have a colleague that specializes in that specifically and teaches in the federal women's prison, and it's amazing the things that come out of that. Now, I mean, if you're going in and teaching a very, STEM type course, it's different. You may not get at that, but from what I know about women, they will, no matter what. And so it is, to me, there is a vast difference. I think you absolutely have to be well aware of the grounds that you're walking in, to me.
My experience here in the state has been because the women's facilities are smaller. They often, this is what I heard, they often felt like they were forgotten, that the men seem to get all of the attention. The men, there's a sense that, men can get training and men can get the education, whereas it's like, what are you giving them? Like, that was the big difference that I saw. So the rooms aren't as nice, like it is more cramped. And so that I saw as the big difference working here.
I'm going to add one thing, and I think it's important to recognize where we are in the system. Right now, on average, we're dropping about 1.3% incarceration rate. Yay, it's going down. But that's not the case for women. Women are increasing, on average about 6%. So it's literally going this direction. One, we have to question why. And two, recognize that if we don't shift this quickly, we're going to end up in a whole nother dilemma.
Other questions? Right there.
We must be interested.
Hello. Did you want to? Oh, okay. I wanted to ask a question about what you all think about the difference between giving credit, not giving credit, having college students in the classes with prisoners versus just having the prisoners in classes, and what the pluses and minuses of those things are.
Sure. The inside-out model, on average, I think we're about 50% of our programs give credit. And frankly, we just had this discussion. A lot of people think that's a deal breaker, whether it gives credit or not. But I quickly, as I expressed earlier about the recidivism rate, I can honestly tell you that there's something that happens with credit or without when an individual can come into a class, hold their own, right? And in the end say, I did this. English 101 doesn't sound so scary to me. You know, so I don't think credit or not credit should be a deal breaker, because unfortunately we're in a system that's constantly financial. It only takes, right? So being able to get credit. Now, I personally, I mean, I've taught classes with just individuals incarcerated, and I've taught obviously inside out too. I think all the above is necessary. But there's really something dynamic happens when you bring those two groups together. I mean, here it's a win-win for everyone. Literally, it costs the correctional system nothing except outside of security training and have an officer sit there, and it gains the students all so much experience from that moment on until the future point. So I personally, even if I'm only teaching a class that's with individuals incarcerated, I still somehow manage to get students in there with me, whether they're TAing for it or assisting in some form, because I just think it's critical personally.
I've done the inside out training as well, and it was quite profound. I'll never forget the experience inside. I am very committed to service learning, which isn't really a service, but or engaged experiential learning, whatever you want to call it. So I always have my students either partnering with the Department of Corrections to do research or going inside. I mean, you know, we can read books all day long about prison, but going in and actually interacting with people, it's just vastly different. And it has a profound effect on my students. So I do merge them when I can, but not all the instructors in my program do. They, you know, it's too big a lift for them. Or I'm very committed to giving credit. I do think there's a lot of value to courses that don't. But one of the challenges is the students inside are usually getting intro level courses. They need sort of basic requirements. Whereas by the time I have senior sociology students that I feel good about bringing them inside, they don't need English 1, they don't need Sociology 1, you know. So I'm doing a weird hybrid right now, which I think is a pretty interesting model, which is on Monday nights, I have an instructor, our debate coach, goes in and teaches speech and debate to the women inside. And I teach criminology to my sociology UVM students outside. And then on Wednesdays, we get together and we talk about Justice and Ethics, this book that we're using, and we are helping them do debate prep and things like that. So it's, and we have some very profound discussions, you know, and so far it's been amazing. We also are doing a podcast. We're creating a podcast inside, and both sets of students are writing it together. So, and Department of Corrections said, yes, great idea, love it. And I was like, really? And I said, we got to bring in microphones and equipment. And they said, fine. And I said, really? Okay. So, yeah, they've been quite amazing to work with. I think that one of the challenges is if you really want to bring outside students in and you're doing credit, trying to get the levels right is difficult, I think, so.
Other questions? Okay.
Yeah, Kathryn, I started actually in Vermont, being a volunteer in education about 23 years ago. So Thresholds and Decisions program. And I switched over. I'm now a Christian volunteer in many prisons in New Hampshire. I'm also a national trainer for people going into prisons. And I just thought, I love all three of your hearts. You're a beautiful woman, really. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. But I commend to all these great young people. I'm uneducated, but being a volunteer in prisons is good for society in general. It's good for you to see people that have taken a different track in life and being able to help them. So I just think about tonight and the woman you heard and the stories that they told, but also that the people you'll meet. I can remember a Christmas Eve. It wasn't Christmas Eve. It was like 2 nights before. Usually they were on lockdown Christmas Eve. But sitting in a circle discussing with men and a couple of them saying how glad they were to be there because they'd probably be dead if they were on the street. And you learn a lot and you hear a lot of great stories in prison, but it's also good to get outside yourself. So that's all.
Other questions? I have a question down here.
So each of you teaches both inside and outside prisons, and I'm curious whether you've found that your teaching in prisons has changed your approach to teaching students who aren't in prison. Do you bring that back into the classroom?
I'll just say briefly, it's made me more compassionate. It's made me understand that I don't know what people's stories are, and so I should start from the assumption that everyone has a story that probably is certainly interesting, but also maybe very painful for them. So I think that that's mostly, it gives you perspective. So the power struggles that you might get into, or with, I don't know, administrators or students or anything, just I think is diminished. I would just say that. I wouldn't say content-wise. I'd have to think about that, but I think more, it's just made me more compassionate.
I think honestly, the inside-out model, it's very interesting. One of the hardest parts, because I'm one of the lead trainers, so I go around the country and I train people how to teach inside out. And one of the hardest things that it's for professors to do is not do the didactic model, right? I'm up here speaking to you and you're taking notes. That's most of your college career, but that's not what inside out is. The truth is I always say the best facilitator is the silent one, and in the end, the class really teaches itself. The discussions are within them. As far as in my classroom, well, the students love all my stories, of course, but that is what's that model is what's changed my teaching. The ability to give the students the chance to really say what's on their thoughts, and it's so hard for us to not give them the time, right? And I'm not talking at you guys, the students like, oh, we're right here, so don't. But giving the students, if you give the direction, they will get there. You just have to give them the room to get there, and that's so hard for so many professors to do. So.
Well, I think, again, and I started my work while I was still here, and so it was interesting to discuss a book with people who felt that I was evaluating them, like who felt like I was listening in and like, is that right? Is it wrong? And Dr. Marshall, we want to make sure we say what you need us to say, or type what you need us to type, versus this other group like here, and I would say the same thing to both groups. Like, I didn't write this book, I don't care if you don't like it. Unless it was like Toni Morrison, then I kind of cared. I was like, okay, if it's Morrison, we kind of have to like it. But again, I think and I spoke about this, it really got me thinking about how I read alongside folks. And I thought more about what it's like for me to have read something, say, 50 times, and someone's reading it for the first time. So how can I make a connection with that person that's not that didactic, like, this is what you should think. And that was, again, the first time where I started to really see like, wow, people are reading outside of the universities. There's like people at the public library and they're just reading and they're not being graded for it. They're reading because they want to. And so I think that came into my teaching, just wanting to read alongside people. And I think that's one of the things that I love about what I get to do now at Exeter. Phillips Exeter, we don't sit in rows, we sit at tables. So we sit at these Harkness tables. So each class has 12 students and they all sit around a table. And the Harkness method is this incredibly student-centered model where the teacher is there as a facilitator, but the students come in and like they jump in and they're ready to go. And that means that I have to like take a lot of the control off and just let it flow and like just say they're going to get out of this text what they get out of it this time, and they can always go back and read it again. I always say Beloved is not going anywhere. They can always go back and read Beloved. And I learned I don't have to be the last word on a piece of literature. It doesn't have to be, so this is what we believe and this is what we'll believe forever. Like you can read it again, a week from now, and then, you might find something different. And finally, it makes me be much more flexible. So I'm teaching this class of 10th graders right now, and I love 10th grade. Like they're so fun. And we came in one day and they were having a debate. Someone said they had a debate with their friends about what is the definition of a pile and what is the difference between a pile and a stack. And so these students sat there for like 10 minutes. And so we're reading Frederick Douglass. So Frederick Douglass is like sitting there, like waiting for us to get back to discussing. But they were talking about language and they were connecting with each other, which was important. And so then they talk about like, what's the better pasta, fettuccine or linguine? And they go like, they really, battle these things out. And for them, that's a really important part of making connections in their group, right? And so that's one of the things that I've really gotten into. I'm much more interested in how students are helping one another. So I changed for example, if we have a discussion and we have a group and like half the group is talking and the other half isn't. So I'm not like, quiet people, you need to speak up, but we talk about what is it like for the student who always talks in class, but who has a sore throat one day, or they didn't finish the reading. Don't they get a chance to take a break too? So it's more about caring for each other. And then finally, I put in this policy. I run a book club at our school, and we meet on Sundays. And which, bless these students for wanting to talk about books on a Sunday afternoon. But I always appoint 2 people in the club whose sole job it is to get through the reading. And we start out the group with them telling us what happened, right? So whoever didn't get to finish it all, we'll all feel like we at least have some grasp on it. And again, that keeps us from like singling people out and making folks feel bad, like, or not coming because they didn't do the reading. So those are just some things that I've put in place, and I think they've actually made me a better facilitator. And I always say a teacher is just somebody who loves something so much they want to tell everybody about it, right? So you just want to tell everybody about Shakespeare. Like, let me tell you about Shakespeare. Or, the chemist, let me tell you about the periodic tables. And you're sitting there like, okay, this person is really excited about like the periodic table. And so that's one of the things that I've brought over. I just love talking about books, and I just want to tell everybody about, hey, there's this great book, and that's it.
I'll take one if I can. I'd be curious if you have kind of anecdotal evidence that reflects on liberal arts versus vocational training. I feel like when we talk about education in prisons and jails, the tendency is always, let's do vocational training, right? It'll get them jobs, right? Very pragmatic, and I don't want to belittle vocational training. But do any of you have anecdotal evidence from what the arts or liberal arts have done, how that's changed people's lives a little bit? Whereas maybe they went from working in the license plate factory, right? What a transferable skill that is, to loving literature or something like that. Is there any anecdotal stories from where people have gone from there?
I think one of the best studies out there that it takes a long time to get through, but it's the Sidore study, the Serious Violent Offender Reentry Initiative. And it's actually one of the most up-to-date data sets out there. It's actually from PRIA. And it actually, interesting enough, they did a study and they looked at individuals, I think 6 months before release, 3 months before release, and in 3, 6, 12, and 18 months after. And based on different types of programs they took, and everybody says, okay, before they get out, and I can attest to this, you think I need a job, I need a car, I need a place to live, I need the basic things. That's, of course, what the study showed that they did. But as time went on, in the end, what I thought was one of the most profound things about the study is they said 18 months out, so many of them said, you can give me a job, you can give me a car, you can give me a home, but if I still have criminal thinking, it means nothing. You know, and so addressing this cognitive piece to it, which I guess is close to liberal arts inside as we're going to get in regards to it. But I think it's important to do the different, you know, and I've worked with so many individuals that had, you know, these phenomenal jobs before incarceration. And there are just, there's this group for sure that go into criminal behavior because of low income or addiction or whatnot. But, you know, we seem to discount, which I can genuinely say, I mean, I wasn't wealthy in any form, but it wasn't about any of those things for me. It was kind of a power struggle. It was this power issue, is, you know, having no voice in society, you know, listen, poor white, you know, privileged me. At that time, that's how I thought. You know, but as I came out, after I came out, I was able to recognize that. So it's, I think to answer your question, I think there's definitely a place. We just don't necessarily, a lot of people don't value that cognitive piece to it that has to happen.
I mean, I think having vocational training is important as long as it is, you know, something that will make sense, that it could actually get a job afterwards, like a culinary program, plumbing apprentice, something like that, great. I think people generally underestimate the transferable skills that you get from liberal arts education. If you look at most employers, when they ask, you know, what skills they want somebody who can communicate, they want problem solving, critical thinking, writing. They want people who can think, right? And that's what liberal arts does better than anything else. And it doesn't even really matter what discipline area. One of the first class we taught inside was, I didn't teach this, someone else taught it, and it was mythology. And there were people who said to me, like, why are you teaching mythology? Because, like, how the hell are they going to use that, right? And I went in to observe a couple times, and I was crying. It was the most beautiful thing. First of all, it was a very gifted instructor, but the thing that was incredible about it was they were so proud of how hard the text was. They were plowing through the Odyssey, and they said, I almost gave up, but I didn't, and I was cursing your name, but I stuck with it. And they have very difficult conditions. They are working in the laundry, reading the Odyssey over the washing machine, with all this loud clanging noise, and I just thought, wow, you are resilient. You're doing this hard thing. And then afterwards I said, well, what classes do you want next? And they said, we want to learn Greek. And I was like, really? You want to learn Greek? And they said, we want to read more mythology. We want to read modern mythology. We want to read, because it opened up this world to them. And the profound things they said about the relevance of the Odyssey to their lives blew me away. So I think liberal arts is transformative for everyone. That's what I'll say.
Yep.
I have a question for Jeri. What advice would you give to someone who uses or sells drugs to encourage them to turn their life around and maybe pursue an education?
Well, that's a tough one, a good one, thank you. But this is what I found. People don't really want to be addicted to drugs, right? And we got to a point where we incarcerated individuals that we were mad at instead of scared of. And so that individual, they need some help, right? But I think what's really relevant to the fact is prison can save people. I can genuinely say that I know many people, including myself, that if they didn't go to prison, would have likely not made it past it. So sometimes, unfortunately, prison can actually, and people are going to lose their mind over this, but can be the answer. When someone can't get any other help. Now, if you're in a facility where drugs are rampant, that's another problem. But I would, and I'm going to equate it to gangs, because I once asked this guy, big gangbanger, I asked him what meant the most to him. Because people say, how do you get someone to think differently while they're incarcerated? And I say, you got to find out what means the most to them. Here's the thing. If it's their mom, if it's their child, if it's their wife, whatever it is, use it against them. But if it's their gang, if it's their addiction, there's just nothing you can do at that moment, because that is what's the most important thing to them at that time. So it really depends where they are. But sometimes, unfortunately, incarceration can be the result for that. And I know people are probably thinking I'm crazy right now.
No, not at all. Anybody else? Questions? Another one here.
So again, I think this is absolutely phenomenal what you guys are doing with this program and everything. And if it's not already being done, how exactly could this be done, say, concerning its success level, how exactly could it be implemented on, say, like a national level, like on a national scale, especially in, say, states that don't have the most humane criminal justice systems? Like, how can we really convince other systems to do so and change it and, implement a program like what you guys are doing?
Well, Inside Out is in 47 states, and I think it might be 7 or 9 countries, I'm not sure. And really, you guys didn't know it, but this was my pitch for you to, push for Inside Out for your school, because, because the students have to want it, for one thing. And I think that, in general, it benefits everyone involved, like I said. But, a lot of these programs are all over the place. Now, it's important to recognize what's advocacy programs and what's not, though, right? Inside Out is not necessarily an abolitionist group. Now, we have a lot of abolitionists that are in Inside Out, most definitely. But here's the thing: you gotta know who your gatekeeper is. I mean, put this in perspective. I go back in prisons and teach, but I cannot visit anyone in them. Like, I can't go on a visiting list. So, but you have to navigate those waters. You have to navigate the politics of it to be able to get back in there and to further grow it, most definitely.
I would just say, push your legislators to bring back Pell eligibility, which was, Pell Grants were eliminated from incarcerated individuals in '94 with Clinton's heinous crime bill. And so bringing back Pell would be huge. There's some pilots going on now. But the other thing is, there's a huge RAND study, RAND Corporation, from 2014 or 15 that showed dramatic results with higher education. In terms of the kinds of interventions that you can do to reduce recidivism, higher education is almost like a magic bullet. It's incredible. So I would push people in power to bring back Pell. That would bring colleges back inside.
Jeri, did I understand that this is the state that you're not in, correct? Or will there be 3 states? You said 48 or 7?
I actually,
not in New
47. I don't actually know, to be honest with you. That's a
Okay.
great question. I don't want to lie
What-
about that.
What I wanted to inform
I
you
don't-
is just that there's a webinar coming up. If anybody is seriously interested in that, the webinar is about laying the groundwork, how states can improve access to continued education for people in the criminal justice system. And it's part of the CSG JusticeCenter.org. So I thought you were trying to get into New Hampshire, and there might be people here that are interested in helping you get in.
I've already pitched it to 2 of them at least, and so, yeah, I mean, I actually wasn't even sure you were talking to me at the moment, but yeah, I think that we're not in New Hampshire, and we also really struggle with some deep southern states. People get trained, but then they have a hard time getting inside to teach the class. That's the politics of the system, unfortunately. But we are actually doing a training, and this is as far south as we've gotten so far, in Alabama this year. So that just goes to show, we have many instructors in Florida, but we can't, a lot of them are struggling to get inside the facilities. Arizona just, they're taking off like crazy, but we're very successful across the northern part of the country, but it's definitely a struggle in the south. And that's probably with prison education, I would suspect in general, I think. I mean, that's maybe too broad of a statement, but it seems that way to me. It's more closed off, most definitely.
If I could ask sort of a follow-up to that. Can you talk a little bit about how you go about getting funding for this? And I think we spend a lot of money on prison programs as it is. But we would have to convince, I think, some of the legislators and those who are in power that this is cost-effective. Like you said, it's the silver bullet. So can you talk a little bit about how you go about getting the funding? Because that's important to people, demonstrating that it's something that's affordable, or at least. And I don't know if you know of any studies that have been conducted that might demonstrate the cost effectiveness of such a program. You do know some studies?
Yeah.
I'd be interested in those. Okay.
The RAND Corporation study said that for every $1 you spend on higher ed in prison, it saves $4 to $5
Okay.
by reducing recidivism and returns and things like that. So there's also research that shows that, this is from Vera Institute, I think, that if someone accesses higher ed while they're in prison, their child is more likely to go to college than they would have otherwise, and it sort of breaks this poverty to prison cycle. So, and one of the things that surprised me about my students is that they told me that they were saying to their kid, well, I'm taking a college class, and then their kid started saying, well, I'm going to take a college class too, and it was an impact that I hadn't really anticipated. The funding piece is hard, and it's hard because, like, I've been fortunate because I got a large gift, and a couple other, a lot of small gifts, but if you think about it, if you start giving state money to people who are incarcerated for education, and those legislators' children have student loans, and so people have said things like, oh, I guess if I want a free education, I'll just go commit a crime. And it's hard to argue with that.
Right.
Although I would say you would probably not trade with them, trade places with them to get that free education. I still think you have a better deal on the outside. But politically, that is a very difficult needle to thread, I think.
Right.
I think with Inside Out, to be honest with you, all you have to do is get your instructor trained, right? I do want to say, Inside Out's a nonprofit organization. They struggle to keep the lights on, believe it or not, because it's not an and it's Inside Out. If you guys want to know any more about it, it's Inside Out Prison Exchange Program. If you Google that, it'll pop right up. It's not the movie, Inside Out, but yeah. And so even the program itself, they rely on donors and grants and whatnot. And as we all know, there's barely money to keep colleges going, let alone give credit away to individuals. The Inside Out program has many different ways that different individuals have managed to obtain college credit. Donors, grants, dual enrollment works well. A lot of high school students get dual enrollment, and they pay. I think it's pretty much standard around the country's around $75, $25 per credit or something within that range. And here's the question. We offer that to high school students. Offering that to individuals incarcerated makes, to me, just as much sense. But the obstacles with that are just the ability to apply to a college, right? There's no internet access inside a prison, so who's going to do that? So there's really the only struggle is the funding to get an instructor trained, and then so it's really not with obviously with getting grants back and Pell Grant with legislation, but it's the discussion with your university. I mean, let's put it in perspective. They're two of the largest organizations in the country, colleges and prisons. You put them together. I mean, I don't know why that has been such a challenge for so long, but they are the two things that should most definitely come together, I believe.
Just another follow-up on that. What would you suggest might be advantages for the colleges? Are there any advantages, or is it just, do they see it as a disadvantage?
I mean, we could ask the students in here right now, how many of you think instead of sitting here in a classroom, going out and getting this real life, real story experience would be something that would be enriching to your college career? No, I mean, and here's the thing. We can walk up to the president's door, I mean, if you can, and say, oh, you should do this, you should do this, here's why. But the students need to do that. The students need to say, I want more out of my college career. I want this class that's going to change the entire endeavor for me. But we also have the butts in the seats argument, right? How you get a professor from 100 students to 15 students and make that liable. Well, there's ways to do that. You make them writing courses, you make them capstone courses, which are notoriously smaller. And then, you get students, I mean, with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, you get a federal badge that follows you. These are things you put on your resume. They can go on as service hours. They can go on as security clearances. So getting your students in there, in the door initially as in just a class, and then they move into internships, they move into independent studies, then you can have maybe just an Inside Out class of 15, but then you got at least 10 other students doing something that developed from it. Mm-hmm. So, that's really kind of the argument that I think is a valid one. The students have to want it.
So students, if you're interested in that, I do believe you can email our president, jim.dean@unh.edu. There are some of us here who are interested in looking at the possibility of prison teaching through UNH or the community colleges or other schools in New Hampshire. And if you're interested in that, give Alex your name. But my question for all of you is, Jeri, you mentioned abolition at some point. I know, Courtney, you have also done work on abolition. So I'm wondering if maybe you can explain, for those who don't know, what that refers to. And then I'm just curious about whether any of you have thoughts about, is there a tension between working within the prison system to try to improve outcomes and maybe working to radically change it as abolition would do?
I'm going to let Courtney take the lead on that one.
So is there a tension between between working in it, but also wanting it to burned to the ground. Is what
Right.
you're saying.
Do you struggle with that at all? Or
No, I
should we put more time on one or the other?
Well, I think, burn it down. Okay. I actually think that it takes, maybe this is just over time. There are folks who consider themselves to be reformers who want conditions to be improved. So living conditions, educational opportunities. And then there are those of us, or those who believe in the complete dismantling of the prison system, dismantling of police forces, just burn it all down. And people say, well, what are you going to do? Yes. And so, but I think what I've learned is that I do the work, and I think about the gentleman who talked about volunteering, that because I am an abolitionist and I don't believe that anybody is disposable, that you don't just throw folks away and, they're over there and I'm over here, that my destiny is linked with theirs. That actually leads me to want to work within the prisons, because that's what's available to me in that, in that realm. Does that mean that I don't then do other types of work, donate money in other types of ways? Like I still do. I believe very much in mutual aid. So that's another part of it. But I think the fact that I don't believe that folks can be kind of just tossed away. And again, I also am very wary about believing that I'm there to save them. Like I'm not there for that either. So again, there's a way I can come in. I can say, well, here I come with a book, right? Which people have done in the past, right? Here's a Bible, sit and, sit with it until you feel like you are sorry. But I don't go into it with that mentality. And this actually goes to the question about making something go nationwide. So one of the kind of issues that's coming up for the Humanities Council in this program is moving this program from the prisons into the jails. Because if you have people for a long period of time and you're giving them literature and they're learning and they're growing and that's great. But what if you have someone for a week or 2 weeks, or you can come in and do something very short? Like how do you measure that? Right. And so that's one of the tensions about taking programs and putting them in different types of environments. So that's kind of how I bring it together. So my love of incarcerated folks really is what takes me there. But if for some reason abolition happened and it meant that, I got to do the same type of work outside, then, sign me up for that as well.
I definitely don't think I'm going in and saving anyone either. One of the things that keeps me going in, and I volunteered for years and years doing all kinds of different things, crochet night, although I do not crochet, and all kinds of other sorts of things. Partly, I think it's very important. First of all, I think everyone should visit a prison. And I think it's very important to have people from the outside going in just to say, I see you. I haven't forgotten about you. And that is one of the things that they often say, is that they feel seen and heard. And I've wondered, why, do they like it when I bring my UVM students inside? Or is that weird for them? What do they think about it? And they say they really like it, because then we're all students together, and they feel like they learn really different perspectives on the same material. And the same is obviously true for the outside students as well. I do all kinds of other things around that. I try to push certain legislation in my state. I testify in court cases to try to minimize certain penalties and things like that. I believe that the vast majority of people could be supervised quite well in the community. the idea that we still take people and put them over here in a cage kind of blows my mind a little bit. And, you know, they're not Hannibal Lecter, right? And, you know, and so I still feel like while we have this system, it's important to say, I see you and I value you. And that's, I'll keep doing that as long as we have mass incarceration. But yeah, I'm becoming increasingly an abolitionist, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, so, actually, I wasn't going to say anything, but I'm going to now. I agree. I think that everybody should go inside of a prison. I think that we are such a society of othering and labeling. I mean, just the fact of the use of the word inmate. Why do we have to box somebody in with that? Why can't we say a person incarcerated? Like, why do they have to be that title? They don't have to be their worst mistake, right? But we also have to be careful about exoticizing individuals incarcerated, because then we take their power away from them, you know? And so in turn, finding that healthy, hey, this is a college course and it's just here, you know, and you know, Inside Out is not about helping. You know, a lot of times I have to have that discussion because the individuals incarcerated, students, and we identify as inside and outside students. The inside students say, well, these kids, you know, we got to talk to them so they don't go down this road. And, you know, the outside students say, oh, we want to get them to have, you know, learn to be get some education. And I'm like, no. Neither one of you are doing that, actually. Like, we're not here to help each other. We're here to learn together and recognizing each other as individuals that are just capable of doing just that. It really, so I think, and frankly, the media has a lot to do with the fact of exoticizing individuals. Yeah, they're not all Hannibal Lecter. You know, I've met some pretty, I tell people, and they, again, think I'm crazy, but one of the nicest men that I've met, actually, he's a black hand in the Mexican mafia. You know, like he's a very kind soul. But in our mind, that label, you know, that I just used completely wipes out his ability to be human. And that's unfortunately, yeah, just be good humans to each other. That's all we really have to do.
Any more questions?
Maybe we can let people just talk to our presenters.
Sure. If there aren't any more questions, we can wrap it up, but they're still here. If anybody wants to ask a question to them directly, would prefer to do it that way. I'm sure we can hang around for a little while. There's still probably some refreshments left.
It's amazing how long we held your guys' attention. Yeah. Thank you so much. My class would never last.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you to our panel. They were wonderful.